Tonight, America, the Caribbean, and a new lethal posture against the drug trade. A 5-week deep dive. Good evening, I'm Michael Patterson. In recent weeks, the United States has dramatically escalated its use of lethal military force against suspected drug traffickers operating from and near Venezuela. Strikes that have killed at least 14 people and catapulted a diplomatic crisis between Washington and Caracas. Tonight we walk through what happened, why it happened, who said what, and the legal and strategic questions that hang over every one of these operations. 1. The new posture. A president's order, a military response since returning to the White House this year. President Donald Trump has signaled a far more muscular approach to narco trafficking in the Western Hemisphere, one that blends national security rhetoric with kinetic military action at sea. That posture reached a new pitch early this month when U.S. forces carried out a strike at sea that Washington says killed 11 people aboard a speedboat allegedly linked to Venezuela and narco-terror groups. The administration framed the action as an act of defensive interdiction against narco-terrorists and explicitly linked it to threats posed by fentanyl and cocaine reaching U.S. streets. 2 weeks later, on September 15, 2025, the president announced, again on Truth Social, a second kinetic strike in international waters that he said killed 3 more people aboard a vessel positively identified as part of violent drug trafficking networks. The White House released short video clips and drastically escalatory language, calling traffickers narco-terrorists and equating illicit narcotics with a deadly weapon aimed at Americans. Officials say the strikes were precise, used military precision strike capabilities, and were directed at boats operating in international waters and carrying large shipments of narcotics bound for the U.S. The action has been accompanied by an unmistakable forward deployment of U.S. assets. Amphibious groups including the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group, the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, multiple Navy ships and submarines, and the deployment of F-35 fighters to Puerto Rico as part of a regional buildup intended, officials say, to disrupt cartel operations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have signaled there could be more operations of this kind. 3. The public timeline. 2 deadly strikes in weeks. September to early September window, U.S. forces struck a high-speed vessel in the southern Caribbean. Washington said it killed 11 individuals, identifying the boat as linked to the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua and loaded with narcotics. The administration released footage and asserted the action was lawful and necessary. Caracas and some reporting cast doubt on the government's assertions. September 15, 2025. President Trump announced a second strike in international waters that killed 3 alleged narco. Trump posted a short video of the strike on Truth Social and described the targets as an immediate threat to U.S. national security. Taken together, the 2 strikes represent a sharp departure from decades in which the U.S. generally relied on law enforcement interdiction, Coast Guard, multi-agency operations, rather than lethal military force against suspect civilian vessels on the high seas. For evidence, reporting, and the gaps that worry experts, here's where reporting and official claims diverge, and why. Capitol Hill is demanding answers. Multiple outlets reporting after the first strike said Pentagon briefers did not present conclusive evidence that the boat's occupants were Tren de Aragua members or that the vessel posed an imminent threat to U.S. forces. Some briefers reportedly could not determine the boat's destination and even said the boat had turned back toward shore before the strike. Those details complicate the administration's narrative that the vessel was heading for the United States. Venezuela's government strongly disputes the U.S. account, arguing that dead were not Tren de Aragua members in denouncing the strikes as murder. Caracas says it has identified families of the victims and asserts the U.S. used fabricated or AI-generated video. Reuters and Venezuelan officials have both said the government found no evidence the 11 killed were members of Tren de Aragua. Senior lawmakers, including Sen. Jack Reed, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, have said there is no evidence, none, that this strike was conducted in and demanded the administration release the intelligence and legal rationale underpinning the strikes. Reed has highlighted that U.S. and international law restrict use of lethal force against civilian vessels unless actually acting in self-defense. Those are weighty claims. If the vessel posed no immediate threat and could have been interdicted or referred to law enforcement, critics say the administration may have crossed a legal line by using lethal force where non-lethal options existed. 5. Administration messaging versus congressional skepticism. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been blunt, publicly claiming we knew exactly who they were, exactly what they were doing, and warning traffickers of lethal consequences if they were found heading to U.S. shores. When pressed by reporters about the evidence, Hegseth refused specifics, saying, "Why would I tell you that?" Marco Rubio has cast the strikes as part of a broader campaign against cartels, calling for a sustained wage of combat against organizations that he says flood U.S. streets with drugs. At the same time, Republican and Democratic senators alike, while denouncing drug trafficking, have demanded to see the underlying intelligence and the legal analysis that justified lethal strikes in international waters. 6. International and regional repercussions. Venezuela. Caracas has condemned the strikes as illegal aggression and is using the incidents to rally domestic support and international sympathy. Venezuelan officials insist their investigations show the victims were not members of Tren de Aragua and demand accountability. Reuters and AP reporting highlight those denials. Regional stability. The deployment of amphibious groups, Marines and F-35s to the Caribbean has raised the temperature in the region, prompting diplomatic protests. Increased surveillance incidents. Reported near misses and close passes by Venezuelan aircraft have been reported, and concerns among U.S. allies about escalation. 7. The legal question at the center. Can the U.S. kill suspected traffickers on the high seas? Under long-standing U.S. policy and international law, the use of lethal force by the military against a civilian vessel is tightly constrained. The administration argues these actions are lawful under the laws of armed conflict, because the targets are designated narco-terroristas and because the operations protect U.S. national security. Critics point to the absence of public evidence of an imminent threat and say the strikes look far more like law enforcement problems than battlefield actions, a distinction with huge legal consequences. Senators have demanded to see the intelligence, legal memos, and any presidential directive authorizing these strikes. 8. Why this matters. Strategic and political stakes. Precedent. If the executive branch can order lethal strikes on civilian vessels in international waters with limited public oversight, that sets a powerful precedent for the use of military force in other non-war contexts. Domestic politics. The strikes play to a domestic audience furious about fentanyl and drug deaths, and Trump's messaging frames the operations as decisive action. But lack of transparency risks bipartisan backlash in Congress and legal challenges. Diplomacy and escalation. Venezuela's denials and province-level investigations, plus regional alarm at the buildup, raise the specter of tit-for-tat actions or miscalculation at sea. 9. What to watch next for immediate indicators. Congressional demand for documents. Whether the White House releases the intelligence and legal justification will shape the political fight. Pentagon briefings. Will the Department of Defense provide specific, verifiable evidence about targets, cargo, and destination? Diplomatic exchanges, formal protests, or actions by Venezuela, regional bodies, or international courts. Operational tempo, more maritime strikes, airborne or expanded deployments to the Caribbean will indicate whether this is a short-term operation or a sustained new campaign. Closing a nation at a crossroads. President Trump's recent orders have changed the calculus of how the United States will confront international drug trafficking, where past administrations leaned on interagency law enforcement and international cooperation. This White House is deploying warfighting tools in peacetime to stop the flow of narcotics before they reach American shores. But the use of lethal force in international waters, without public evidence of an imminent threat or full congressional consultation, raises profound legal, moral, and geopolitical questions. The next few days in Washington and Caracas will tell us whether this posture is a new sustained strategy or an escalation that will force a constitutional and international reckoning. I'm Michael Patterson. We'll be following every brief, every document release, and every hearing. Free Press TV will bring you the reporting and the scrutiny these strikes demand.